En esta sesión del seminario organizado por el Grupo de Investigación en Didáctica de las Matemáticas del IUMA de la Universidad de Zaragoza, la profesora Rhonda Faragher de la Universidad de Queensland comparte resultados sobre investigaciones encaminadas a la inclusión efectiva de estudiantes con discapacidad en el aula de matemáticas de secundaria.
There we go. So, I'm from Australia, beautiful city, like here, with a river, lovely. That's my university, University of Queensland. The education building is over there, and it's not a lovely new building like this. It's old, and they never take photos of it. It's terrible. But we like it, it's home. And so that's where I'm from and my accent. But that's why I do the research I do. There's my little girl. She's now 27 and nowhere near as cute, but she was quite lovely then. Oops, I keep pressing this the wrong way. And I've worked with Ruth since she was that baby to help her learn mathematics. And not many people in the world, when she was born, had been really doing mathematics. And we were really told that, give up, there won't be much that can be done. Well, them's fighting words. I wasn't going to put up with that, not for my daughter. And Elena's the same, you know, we want to share our love for mathematics with our students. And there's Ruth proudly holding her Queensland Certificate of Education. That's like the finish of school. You can get a certificate that just says you turned up. And that's often what is given to students with disabilities. You just get a certificate to say you came along. And I used to say my cat could get that certificate. And my cat actually could, because all you had to do was actually come to class. Didn't have to achieve anything. And my cat would have loved it, would have sat there, would have enjoyed you patting her. Happy. And I thought that is not good enough. Not good enough. And to get the certificate, you have to get mathematics. Something. You have to get a tick in mathematics. Well, I wasn't happy with it just being whatever. I actually wanted her to earn it and get it and achieve mathematics. So that's where we've worked. She still says, and it drives me mad, I hate maths, to anybody who will ask her. And I said, thank you very much. At least pretend. But there she goes. So hello to you two. So you're all maths teachers, I think, yes, and mathematicians, and thank you for coming. I could ask you why you're here, and you're probably just being very kind, but thank you for staying at the end of a long day. But maybe you could just tell me what you do.
I'm teacher. Good morning. I am Alberto Arnal. I'm teaching here just like Pablo and Elena. We are teaching to prospective future teachers in primary or secondary school.
That's what I do. Fabulous.
Julio Sancho. I'm retired teacher.
Welcome.
I am Nuria. In my case, it's the same as Pablo, Alberto, and Elena. I work here, so I teach to pre-service teacher, primary or secondary.
Okay, that's great.
I'm working in Pamplona. I'm Inmaculada Itasoain, and I teach to pre-service teachers also and engineers.
Thank you.
I'm Alberto Duque. I'm teaching algebra at the School of Sciences here and the School of Engineering.
Oh, welcome. Lovely to see you, and welcome. Thank you, Elena.
I work here, but I work in a school, in a secondary school, during all my day. works with children with Down syndrome. We have 15 children involved in this project from more or less 10 years old.
Thank you.
I am Teresa. I teach in secondary school. For me, it's interesting because I try to teach these things every day, and I don't sure about what is the better way. Thank you.
Welcome, and it'd be good to collaborate.
I'm Elena, and I work in a secondary school.
You do?
You
do?
You know.
And it's lovely to have you here, and you're studying as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good deal.
And I am Pablo. I work here with my colleagues in education, teaching pre-service, primary and secondary education.
Yeah. So welcome. We're colleagues. We share a lot in common, and we share that challenge of encouraging our students to want to share our love of mathematics, and that can be difficult, particularly when they feel they don't have the skills to do it. And I felt the same way, so it's part of what we have to do. So, you've shared that with me, so thank you. Just make sure that no. There is something not quite right there, so let me just open up the correct. So we've checked in, warmed up, and we're going to look at the right to learn mathematics and where this has come from in Australia and what's behind my research. And my research is around helping teachers in Australia do the job that the law requires them to do. But the law doesn't tell them how to do it. And we don't really know. So that's what our research study is about. So we'll talk about planning for most and then making adjustments. Australia's called it adjustments. The UN calls it accommodations. But really what we know that means is that we've got to make it fit. So we either adjust it, we accommodate it, we change our clothes somehow to make it fit. And that's where we're headed. Okay. The good old days for kids with Down syndrome were actually dreadful old days. At birth, they got put into places like this. This building still stands in Australia. It's in Brisbane, just on the outskirts. It's called the Challenger Centre. Doesn't take babies anymore. But there were people with Down syndrome that lived their entire lives confined to that prison. Let's call it a prison. They often died in their teenage years, and it was not what we would look back and say we did a good job. They closed that quite late, about 1990. They were just people who were old, who had nowhere. They'd never lived anywhere else, but they were no longer taking babies from about 1970, 77, 78, which is when the Down syndrome research program started at the University of Queensland, because these were families taking their babies home for the first time, and these researchers thought, well, wonder what that difference is going to be. So those people are now in their mid-40s, and that's getting old for a person with Down syndrome. But life expectancy was about 12 when this was there. Life expectancy is now 60, 1 in 10 live into their 70s. So as teachers, we've actually got to think about what do we teach rather than just keeping them until they die. So there was a push for change And schooling is very, very different now. And thank goodness, you know, our kids grow up and have such good experiences and they do great things. So in terms of the right to learn, that's back in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. It says there's a right to education. It then talks about this further in the rights of the child, because there was a sense that in some countries children weren't thought of as having rights until they were adults. They were more the property of families. And we needed the same thing for people with disability, because it was a sense that some of those rights really didn't apply, even though they do, but they wanted to be much more specific. And in the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability, there is a right to inclusive education, not just education of some sort. And that's why Australia's a signatory, Spain's a signatory. That's why we've got these laws, because we've signed up to the International Convention, and we have to match that in our own countries. How? It's really not easy. I won't show that video because it's going to. Because what I really think, while the law is there, the real purpose, in my mind, is because there's actually joy in learning mathematics. There is the reason for learning is not because we're doing it for law, we're doing it because we actually think it matters. And it does. We know the love of it, kids know the love of it, so let's get into it. One of the things that struck me when we first started doing the project that we were going to do, we were talking to teachers about teaching year-level mathematics, senior or secondary mathematics to students with Down syndrome. One of the things that some teachers said to me was, isn't that cruel, asking them to do hard things that they're not going to enjoy? And I was a bit taken aback actually. Made me sort of stop and think, what an interesting perception. What do I say with that? And so we just sort of at that point thought, well, what's happening at the moment's not working. We're going to try something different. If it doesn't work, well, we'll have to keep trying. But one of the things that we found is that they loved it. So if we have a look, this is actually Ruth, even though she says she hates maths. Just in interest of time, I won't show her, but I'll show some of the other kids. She loved doing algebra so much that she was actually going to do homework. And that is enough of a shock for a mother, let me tell you. There you go, look at her smiling away. And the way she goes, oh, interesting, we don't have sound. Oh, look at that. Now, this boy, he was in a class, a little like your box of props that we had today. We were talking about, we were in this classroom and they were all very lively. They were having a great time and they were all jumping around like frogs. And I said to her later, oh, I know those classes. They're called a box of frogs. And this boy with Down syndrome, he was the most studious kid in the class. The rest of them are all jumping around trying to get out of maths. Not him. He loved it. And here's his work. Here he's expanding out the powers, so they're all doing the same thing. But he is so intent on it that the assistant in the room has the job of just sort of saying, watch the teacher now. And then he'd go and help the other kids. Because this guy, he's, I've got to finish this sheet. He doesn't want to finish it. So he loved it so much. And then this boy, he's in year 11, and he gets to use a graphics calculator. And this is not the common thing that happens for a student with Down syndrome. And he's using it to do statistics calculations. Now, even though you can't see the sound, you can see his face. Now, doesn't he just look like he can't wait? And he says, because I asked him, what do you love about it? You know, he's just getting a sheet of calculations. And so I said, well, what do you love? And then he goes, I get to use my calculator. And you see him. He goes, yay! I love that every time, because I have taught senior statistics to so many kids. Never has anyone done that. He's so excited. So there he is. And this is what we see over and over, that when kids are given the opportunity, you can see that this has lots of colour and lots of support. So the teacher had really stepped out. What did he have to do to use his calculator? And actually the teacher aide didn't follow the instructions, didn't know how to use the calculator, never seen it before, and just thought it was an ordinary calculator. And I'm there videoing it and thinking, you're about to tell me the wrong thing. So I called the teacher over, and then she went through the steps, and the teacher aide's going, oh my gosh, because you know the way they do it, they just bring up all the calculations and so on. So you have to actually teach and set it out. But the teacher said, well, I know it takes me time now, but I will use this over and over. So where I'm going with this is we've got the rights, we know we've got to do it. Some ideas of how we might do it, because the kids love it and they want to do it. We've put into the Inclusive Education Guidelines from Down Syndrome International. That's the one I was meaning about translating. So it's in French and Bosnian and a few things, but it's not the Spanish, and I think that would be useful around the world. Yeah. Let us have a look at some of the terms. This is a diagram that's a graphic of the UN definitions, and it actually came out of a Brazilian funded project. And there are different terms here. So the diagram, while the definitions are from the United Nations, the diagram itself is from this group in the Alana Foundation, and it's freely available. But let's have a look at the definition of inclusion, and don't strain your eyes, because I've just pulled this out, and I'll give you a moment to read it, and I'll read it with you, because one of the striking things in this we'll talk about. So inclusion involves a process of systemic reform, embodying changes and modifications in content, teaching methods, approaches, structures and strategies. So a whole lot of things that you constantly do, and why it's a process is that every student you have will be requiring something to be moving. It's not, this is what we do and we've done it, tick. Why do we do it? To overcome barriers. I've highlighted that because that's an important phrase for me. With a vision serving to provide all students of the relevant age range with an equitable and participatory learning experience and environment that best corresponds to their requirements and preferences. La la la. What's missing? I'll let you think for a minute, and then I'll tell you what I think is missing, and it's fascinating. There is no mention of disability. Isn't that interesting? When you spot it, you think, wow, wow. In that document, inclusion has no mention of disability. And I love that, because what it means, anyone who comes through this door could well have barriers to their learning. They're likely to bring gifts, and that may be a person with a diagnosed disability. It might be a person who's gifted. It might be a person who is an English speaker in a Spanish-speaking country. It can be all sorts of barriers to learning. no mention of disability. So we don't think about them as the other that we've suddenly got to do all these different things for. So inclusive education, I love this. It's about welcoming, valuing and supporting diverse learning needs of all students, removing those barriers. And if you belong, you'll be missed. So you're a part of the group, not, oh, thank goodness Rhonda didn't come today. I'm right now. So it's these things that I think come to a philosophy about why we're here and what we want to do. So just have a minute, just to talk to somebody near you, just to stop listening to me for a minute about that. We'll pause it when in about 30 seconds. You'll notice that I offered a choice, though I said, talk amongst yourselves. You might feel like talking. You might have been talking all day. Well, you might be, got a bit of a headache and you just think, or you might prefer always to draw a diagram, to think about things in that way, doodle. When we may offer choice, we engage people to be able to respond to the work in the same sort of, reaching the same goal, but in a way that works for them. And, I put something like post on social media because Katie Novak, who's from the United States, she's the one I got that idea from. And she's so into social media. And she said, come on social media. And all these people go, no, we haven't. And I'm thinking, what is social media? I'm still not sure. But we're going to come back to this idea of choice. Okay, so we've got the right to learn. So let's think about planning for mice. In buildings, there's a thing called universal design. And it's where you think ahead of time in designing a building that makes it as accessible for as many people as possible. So if you can avoid it, you don't put stairs or stairs alone. You have all options for people so that they can either use the stairs or conveniently use something else. Because if you've got a wheelchair and you've only got stairs, then you might have to put in an expensive thing like that. And in my education building, where I work, I did my classes there back in the 80s, and the lecture theatre in the building is inaccessible to a lecturer in a wheelchair. You cannot get to the dais. Now, back in the 80s, we wouldn't have had probably people who get there, well, go and get another job. Whereas now we have laws that will say, you got to fix this. So what they've had to put in is this quite cumbersome sort of lift that you press a button and the door will slowly open and a person will slowly be able to get onto it, and then it'll take them down about 3 steps to open up. Cost them a fortune because the designer didn't think at the beginning, that's not smart. Let's think about how we can get into a room without making it difficult. And then we look around and we see things that are in this room that just make it convenient. We've got the lights, we've got they're where they need to be, we've got the coat hooks because that's handy. We don't have coat hooks in my country because why? But you need them. And so it's just thinking ahead. There will be people who will need these things. So this is this idea of universal design, where you can just design things that look attractive, but you're expecting there are going to be people with a variety of different access needs. And that's just one of us, but you'll see it. These sorts of things on products, and you just recognise it once you start looking for it. And there are things there like braille on hand creams, signs on doors if you don't speak English and you can't see it but there's braille there. There's a picture. There's some stairs where they've got the braille trails so that if someone's using a cane then they know that there's some hazard coming. The good thing about it is it's there if you need it, but if you don't, it doesn't matter. You know, if there's a braille trail and I just walk over it. But it's there if you need it. Now, we're going to think about this in terms of education, because that's what some people in the United States did. They said, well, hang on a minute, how about we start planning like this? Planning where we imagine there are going to be a whole lot of people who are going to need help for various things. Let's just plan it in ahead of time. Now, at my university, we're starting to think about how we might do this as university lecturers. And that's an interesting experience for us because we're thinking, okay, well, what would we need to do before we even know if students are coming? We can expect there are going to be some students with a vision impairment. We can expect that there'll be some students with hearing impairment. Certainly in my country, there are an awful lot of students with anxiety disorders. I don't know if that's a common experience here. We can expect that there will be some students who need to have material in a format that they can go over it and over it and over it, that they can prepare. So what we're starting to do at our university is to think about what sort of guidelines would we provide to lecturing staff in how to prepare material. Now, an awful lot, if it's provided in an electronic format, students can work out what they need to do for themselves. Where we're going to come unstuck, I think, is in assessment, but there's another one. Back to school, the idea is that before you've got any kids in that room, we can predict that there are going to be kids coming in and sitting in some of these places that are going to need certain help in their learning. They're going to have barriers, and we can plan around it. So the people in the United States came up with this universal design for learning. It's shortened to UDL. And the UDL idea is just that. And what it comes up with is multiple means for doing anything. So back to when we did that reflection and I offered you choice. The idea is that you provide choice for different things, not bucket loads of choice, but just some options for kids to learn in the way that works for them on that day. We're not saying they've got learning styles so they're always going to want to do it this way, but that there are options. Some days they might come to class and they've been up all night and they're tired. Or some days they just want to listen to somebody reading the text for them. Sometimes they might want to draw or play with the equipment. Whatever works for them. But what it does is it starts to build in them responsibility for their learning. So, okay, you don't want to talk to somebody today, well, what are you going to do? Okay, you don't want to draw the diagram, what are you going to do? How do you want to do it? You've got these options. And seeing it work for kids, and I watched it in Elena's class today, those kids had different ways to do that same fraction task. And the beautiful thing was Elena got different kids up to show them. And so it wasn't, all right, you didn't do it that way, and you don't understand that way, but that's okay. You've got your own way, and you've learnt that there are other approaches. So multiple means for what have you got to learn, how am I going to show that I know, and then why do I have to learn it anyway? We need to give these different things. The Americans have gone into that in a big way, and I won't, but just if you want to look it up further, UDL, lots of books and resources now. So, how are we going? Let's just look at the task rather than do it. And you're thinking, thank God, it's just about let's just give it away. But if we were to take a topic at a year level, and you can think up a design feature for what's being learned, how students will show what they've learned, why they're learning it. If you've got lots of different features, you can then swap and you can keep adding. And teachers do this over time, so they take their lesson and they just keep adding things into it. And it becomes a bit of a practice. Do you notice how there's some options there as well? So you could write your ideas, you could post them, you could write on a whiteboard, you could draw. And in a classroom, if a teacher has lots of different options, and I've worked in classrooms where on the side they've got things like mini whiteboards, they've got equipment that the students, when they want to, can just go and get, and they can come up to the board and write on the board if they want to. Whiteboards around the room so they can interact how they want to at different points. So this is about just providing these options for students and thinking about, all right, well, if I'm expecting that somebody's not going to be too good at reading, what could I put in place? So if things are like the textbooks here, they're electronic as well as print. If somebody's having trouble with the text, they can put their earphones in and have it read to them, you know, the text to speech, the options are there. So, comments? Very difficult to do these things. You're already doing it. Well, but don't we always think, well, I'm not good enough. I could be doing this better. But I've seen how good it is. So you've got to just say, great. You know, and we just keep adding things.
Well, for me it's easier to have students at different levels together. Because when I work only with children with Down syndrome, I have the feeling that I'm the best teacher that when I have this kind of students among other students.
Yes.
Because perhaps I have, in a math class, I have always the pressure to the preparation that good students need for their future.
Yeah.
And this kind of pressure, I think, at least here in Spain, is very strong.
Yeah, I think so. But we haven't got to there yet. So at the moment, we're thinking about what can we plan ahead of time, so that we haven't got to suddenly go, oh, you're having trouble reading, or you've forgotten your glasses today, because the lesson already has those options there. So really what we're thinking at the moment is just planning in a way that meets the most need. And one of the things, like that teacher who, with the calculator steps, she would make sure anything that she did like that, she made 2 copies. So that there was one for the student it was 4, but then she would make it available to everyone. And the other kids would come and use it. And so it's that sort of thing of just thinking, how do we make sure that we've got those options? But you're quite right, because some need more than universal design. So there will be some students who come into the classroom who just will not be able to get around the barriers for their learning just by what is available in the planning. So that's when we think, oh, sorry, this is about universal design in buildings and products. So it's not enough to just say, oh, well, we've designed the building, you're right now, or we've got the product. Now this one is a little device because our banknotes don't have braille on them. And when my son asked a politician, I think it was the Prime Minister's aide or somewhere or other, we should have braille on banknotes. And they said, oh, it's an interesting idea. Well, some poor public servant must have had a big job to do, because we got this extensive letter explaining all of why they'd made this decision and who they'd consulted. And I'm thinking, he was only 8 or something at the time, just asking the question. But it's because they don't slip through the ATM. so they'd flatten. So what they do is they give people who are blind this device, and our notes are different lengths, so they fold them over, and then they can feel, oh, that's a 50, oh, that's a 20. They're all the same width, but they're different lengths. So that is a feature. It's not universal design because it will not work for everybody, and so that's why we have that. And also, I have a friend, that's not her, this is a screenshot from a TV show that was about thalidomide. Thalidomide was the drug that caused birth defects in the 60s, and so in Australia it's been quite a lot in the news because of they're going through compensation. But my friend has a very modified house. She doesn't have arms or legs, she has hands and feet, and lives alone with support. But her house would not work universal design. She has to have it very modified. So we think about that then in terms of who in our classrooms are going to need more than universal design for learning. And we put them, what they need in education inclusion plans, or at university student access plans. So people who need to have specific adjustments, it must be documented. And I think that would be true in your country too. It's part of our law that if you're going to make changes, you've got to do it that way. But the thing is that universal design isn't an adjustment, because the more you pride in the universal design, the less you need to adjust. And I've watched teachers just, it really is amazing that more kids can just access it. So let's just look at, briefly then at the end. And this is, and I don't think we'll get the sound, which is, anyway. This is an episode of Bart Simpson, and let's just see what we do. No sound, but I think I can get there. Let's see. Never mind. What that was an option was, is he says, so let me get this straight, we're behind the other kids, so we're going to do less slower. And that's often what happens to kids who are a long way behind. So they might do easier work from previous years, but they'll never catch up. And so we've got to get out of that mind of that. Sometimes they get given completely different content, and you've got to make a choice about why you're going to do that, give people different content. And sometimes there's a focus on life skills or functional maths, but for various reasons that I've written about in other places, we cannot predict what life is going to be like, and things are changing so fast. So in terms of what mathematics, I've left with the conclusion that we really must get into curriculum. But when we're talking about what barriers, and this is part of the research project, what barriers for the teachers might be there. And there's a view that mathematics is hierarchical and it must be learnt in order. I was taught that. And so I think many of us as teachers were taught that you must do this, and then you do that, and then you do that. And there's even that sense of before you teach this, you've got to pre-test to make sure they know all this stuff. And we got some evidence from Italy starting up some years ago that made us really question that. Then there's this view that mathematics is really only there for what you need in the future. Well, I think most of what we've ever learned, we've never used. But it doesn't mean to say it wasn't worth it. And that we know as mathematicians that the way that we think in mathematics is actually an interesting part of human creativity. So why would we not want some people to do it? And this idea that everything is stable and this curriculum that we've always had, that was designed for people who didn't have calculating devices or all the other tools of mathematics, is just really a time that's passed, and we've got to rethink, because if we're still going to be doing all of that, we're not doing the new stuff that people actually need. So sometimes too that there's that thought that maths is too hard. Like, we don't think that. So finding a better way, we've been doing some Australian research studies. We began with individual children and looked at what they could do, children with Down syndrome, and we noticed that some kids were being very successful, and it seemed like they were being taught things, so that there were equipment or words that they were using that was very much part of what teachers speak about. And we wanted to know what was going on. So we started looking in primary classrooms where teachers were teaching the students with Down syndrome and seeing how they were doing it. And then we saw some really spectacularly good teachers. And Melanie's one of them. she was really a superstar. Would not have said she was. She would have claimed that she wasn't confident, but she was fabulous. And now we started to look in secondary classrooms, and we did a pilot study focusing on students with Down syndrome, but then we've gone broader to focus on teachers' planning and thinking about how they make adjustments for certain students. And what we aim to do is, this is in law in Australia, that teachers are required to provide reasonable adjustments, but then just drops it. Do it. Come back when you've done it. And so we're trying to find out what does it mean, and we want to know what helps or hinders this, and including learners who struggle. And we've been co-designing professional learning. So there's teacher beliefs in classroom practices and seeing if there's an impact on student behaviour. And we're just in the midst of gathering that data. And it's a bit difficult because the schools that we have, they have to give money to the project, so we've had some quite... the schools that were available to give money to the project, some came on board because they thought it was important, but haven't actually enrolled any students with significant intellectual disabilities. So it's an interesting project, but we all know research doesn't always work the way we want it to go. So year level curriculum is about jumping ahead, not trying to catch kids up, but just say, all right, here you are, you're in this class, what are we going to do? And I'm going to go past a whole lot of this stuff because I don't want to keep this too late. And I think this will be more time. Yeah. But I will show you this one because I think for people who haven't seen it before, I think it's actually quite interesting to see. This is Ruth, and she couldn't do 5 plus 5. So she said 25 when a teacher asked her. Now, when the teacher said, Rhonda, I'm going to need help, I was actually thinking, hey, that's not too bad. I was thinking, we know what she did. It's not 57 or 3 million. But the thing is that Ruth was in year 8, and so the rest of the class were about to do percentages, and here's you've got a kid in the class who can't do what's year 1 work. And so we talked about it, and because I'd seen this from Italy, where students with very similar arithmetic skills were doing Cartesian coordinates. And this one, you can maybe see that there's a line there with points on it, and they come down to using the distance formula to find out that it's 10, and the student learned how to measure on a ruler once they'd done Cartesian coordinates and the distance formula. Get the ruler. Oh, is that what a ruler's for? I mean, who would think that? That is just bizarre, isn't it? I mean, you think, surely they've got to know how to measure first before you do that. There's some really fascinating stuff going on. So we wanted to give it a crack, and here she goes. Oops. Maybe not. She works hard. This is the girl who can't do 5 plus 5, and yet she's finding 23% of 189. Following the procedure, like all the other kids, whether you want that to happen or not, that's what the teacher was doing. She's there meticulously following it. But she needs her calculator to actually get the calculation. Who of us multiplies 23 by 189 in a head's numbers? Who writes it down? But you don't. We use a calculator, do we not? So it's a practical solution. But the thing is, she's actually doing percentages. Now, she learnt that in year 8. She was doing it in year 12 when it was in terms of finding the interest rate and finding calculation of numbers and stuff that was in part of her year 12. But she remembered it. She knew how to do it. So that, you would never have done that if you'd followed what I'd been taught, that you had to teach a person how to add 5 plus 5, go through all those steps before you become an illuminator. So it's important for us to think, okay, it works, does it always work? And it does for our kids. This is that boy who was with the graphics calculator, he was still doing this in year 9, adding up, hated it, because he knew he ought to find it easy when he didn't. The other kids knew he wasn't up to it. The teacher decided, all right, well, let's get into substituting to linear equations. He's doing lots of single-digit addition, but now, in a context, it's actually year 9 work. And he was so proud of himself. He just did all this homework, couldn't wait to show everyone what he could do. It's important for a kid with Down syndrome. So, where does the theory come from? You might know of Bruner. He's an American, lived for 100 years, actually, only died recently. And he talked about, we can teach any subject in some intellectually honest form at any stage of development. And we've got this 3-minute thesis idea that people have to explain their thesis, their PhD thesis, in 3 minutes to novices. And you can do it. It takes work, but you can do it. You can work out how to transfer what you have into ways that kids can think about it and make sense of it. So, I think some of these are pretty big ideas, but one of the challenges, I think, theoretically, is to think about this Vygotskian idea of the zone of proximal development. And that was where we had sometimes that idea of the hierarchy, that if they can't do 5 plus 5, you're not going to be able to get them to do percentages. But if you think about where's the zone, what can they do with the help of good teaching and the right support, what can they do there? It actually shifts where the zone is. And that was a clip where Ruth's learning algebra for the first time. And with questioning, she had a teacher who had a son with Down syndrome, and he was keen to experiment because his son was about 5 years younger. So he's trying things out, which is fabulous. He taught her tremendous things. But you can see just at that point where she can't do it by herself. She needs the help of an adult working with her. But then, oh, I get it. And so you can see, well, the zone is different to where we might have thought it was. It can be right at the cutting edge of that year level curriculum. So designing adjustments is pretty big stuff, but what I've found people need is really just imagination and creativity. You know, to think, what's the barrier that someone's going to have and what can they do to get around it? You need a sense of humour, gosh, and you need to be ready to have a go. Just give it a try and see what happens. And so the 5 steps, start with year level curriculum, start with what the other kids are doing, work out what is really important, the fixed goal, what do they have to know, and then what are the barriers? What are the kids going to have trouble with? So you think Ruth's going to have trouble calculating, can't do it, give her a calculator. Other kids might have other barriers. And then you plan your ways around them. You think, what's going to be their problem? and then you're going to look for ways that, how will you know what they can do at the end of it? And thinking through some of these steps, sorry, I'm just going to click through all of these. Because I couldn't get to it. Okay, so I wanted to come to this point. Here's this lesson on trigonometry. Normally he would be out of the class doing something else. And so we wanted to think about, well, what could he do? And he wanted to do, no, he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to do anything because he was so sick of doing stuff. And actually he'd taken himself off to the office to go home. And I got to the lesson, I got the cameras and everything, we planned the lesson, we're all hot to go. He's not there. And his mate said, oh, it's all right, I'll go and get him. So his mate went down to the office, and there he is. He rang his dad, and his dad thought he was sick and was coming to get him. And he said, mate, it's going to be fun, I'm going to be teaching you. Because we'd lined his mate up to give him a hand. So he goes, oh, all right. And up they come. Dad, who had to come from school or work, could now not. And so what he had to do was just work out what are the right angles from ones that weren't right angle. And he could see the grin on his face, so proud of himself that he could do it. So for him, the fixed goal in the trig lesson was to work out what the right angle is. I'll skip past these, and you've seen the before and after. So the adjustments, that's an adjustment. This one I didn't show you, but this little girl, she couldn't draw diagrams, so the teacher showed her an iPad app. So she used her finger. All she had to do was move blocks across the screen to get her diagram. The graphics calculator you saw, this is the steps the teacher worked, so that's an adjustment. And you saw him, he's got his adjustment, he's showing what he did in a different way. So all of these are things that teachers have done extra to allow students to succeed in what they're doing. And we'll just end, I don't have the subtitles. What this teacher ends up saying is, we just decided we'd just do it. They felt like they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the resources, they didn't have it, but they just thought they'd have it. So things that are coming, I think it's really important to have a critical friend. Teachers wanting to have a go. Kids love it, so remembering that is important. Challenging our automatic assumptions that they won't be able to do it. Just put that aside and see what happens. And the importance of partnerships between teachers and if you've got untrained assistants in the room. And what we've done today is looked at the rights, what you might do to plan for most, and then what might you do that's extra. So, with no time at all, but bang on 8, that's it. So, no questions, no comments, no ideas. Yeah. Thank you to people who've helped me, and there's my email address. Except it's wrong. No, it's wrong. Yeah. It's just r.